We are live talking about the hidden art production in comic book. We were just discussing something because Paulo mentioned that who was it? Tell us again. There was a publisher interviewed.
Yeah, a publisher was interviewed by a friend of mine. He has a Portuguese website about comics, and he has a YouTube channel as part of that. And I'm a regular guest there as well.
Okay.
Um, and and it was the publisher from ASA, which is one of the largest book publishers in Portugal. They have a comics division, and well, they usually only publish European comics. They have the rights for the Dark Horse produced Stranger Things comics. And during the interview, he mentioned that the U.S. publishers don't send them the digital files to work with.
Yeah.
They only give them the complete files, so it's a lot more work for them to edit them to the format that's used here. So I imagine they do the same to every other country.
Right. And we were
And
talking, since Wilson and I are both production guys, we know exactly what he means. When we put a comic book together, the artwork is usually in Photoshop. The lettering is usually in Illustrator, and you use a program called InDesign to put it all together into a publication. That's what InDesign does. You make magazines and comics in it. And at the end, we use InDesign to output a PDF, and that's what we send to the printer. And I imagine, like I said, with the European people are just getting that finished PDF. They're not getting the Illustrator and Photoshop files that would make their lives a lot easier to work with.
because the French comics publishers give them everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because they demand that the licensee is now putting as much quality into their product as they do.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Since I do a lot
traditionally,
of,
American publishers have always been here, have the stuff. Do whatever you want with it.
We got a couple people saying good evening, Lord Tatman, and good evening, Tit Goblin. A Lord and a Tit.
welcome. Yeah, because I've done a lot of lettering for books where they translated and then published over here. That first started for me was for manga, and the original mangas. What we used to do way back in the day when the comics were black and white, and the manga still are, they would give us physical comic books, the physical mangas in Japanese, and as a letterer, part of our jobs was to cut the mangas, scan them in ourselves, and erase the text. And so we could put the book in a microwave for a few seconds, and it makes the glue manageable, so we could pull out the pages, scan them at 1200 DPI, and then work from there, and then just erase. Which was a great gig. It paid very well. I think the first 6 months of doing that, I paid off my computer, my scanner, my brother's computer. Manga paid for the studio to get created at that time. Because the mangas also were over 150 pages, the smallest book. A larger book was about 300 pages. Compare that to a 22-page book. The problem was the amount of time we got to do a manga and to do a comic book were usually the same 30 days. So manga made me a really quick letterer. But on the flip side of that, we were only lettering it. We're not putting in the balloons because they're drawn in. Years later, we would get them on CD, and they would have the artwork would be clean. And then after doing manga for so long, I've worked for other companies, and we would get books from France, and they would send us all those files that we needed. Even the original French files, in case we needed to reuse a sound effect that they used, that can be reused. Sometimes the lettering is just a little off on one word. So we can reuse those files, but they would give us everything we possibly need. But is strange. And on the flip side, the American books go out as a PDF, and that's it. It goes out the way it goes out.
In the days before desktop publishing, when we were doing Akira at Marvel, they used to get those pages in as I don't know. I don't even think there were stats, but there was some kind of copy, full sized.
They were. I remember holding them.
Yeah, they
felt like original art. It didn't feel like a stat.
Right. For those of you who don't know, a stat feels photographic because a stat machine is a photochemical process. So when you would get the final piece, it would be like holding a photograph, a piece of photo paper. It'd be floppy. And what then, Marvel had stat machines.
And it would be shiny as well.
Yeah. It smelled like a photo too, because it had the same photochemicals. These were they were more like original art. They were on some kind of paper, so they must have printed them and sent them over.
I'm guessing so. I would imagine because they were oversized as well.
Right. They were. When he says oversized, he means they were original art size, which is around 10 by 15 on 11 by 17 paper. And all the balloons were there. I think we pasted the lettering on, because then it had to be lettered. They'd send it out to a letterer. He'd put a piece of vellum over it and letter on the vellum. Then we'd come back to us in the bullpen, and we'd white out the back of the vellum, put glue on it, and paste it down. So I remember Akira pages being easier to do. So I think we pasted them in the center of the balloon. King's Poet's here too. Good evening, King's Poet. Yeah, and so that was even earlier. That made it easy. And I think that they were also already flopped, so they must have done that in Japan.
I would imagine so, because the text. I don't know. I don't recall if they left their sound effects in Akira, because sometimes the sound effects is incorporated into the artwork. Right. So they might have flipped it themselves to control the artwork on how they wanted it to read. I would imagine they did that.
Did you get the material for Akira already colored?
No, we colored Akira.
It was colored,
meaning Marvel colored it.
Steve Oliff?
Steve Oliff, I believe it was Steve Oliff.
It may have been. He was the first computer colorer, I think.
Yeah, I think Akira was the first computer colored book for Marvel.
For Marvel, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, there wasn't even. I don't even know how they did it, because there was nothing set up to computer color, as far as I know, in those days. I mean, at Marvel, we never even saw the colors in house.
Right. So he must have basically figured it out himself, and suggested to do it. I do not even know how.
Yeah,
he brought it to work.
And I don't even think he was. I don't even know if he was using a Mac, or what was the graphics computer that was around in the late 80s. All of a sudden, I can't remember the name of it. A lot of people used it. It was an Amiga.
It might have been an Amiga. I don't recall the name of the program.
But there was like a third, besides Macs and Microsoft, it may have been AMIGA Amiga. That may have been it.
It could have been. It might have been what I used in high school. I don't remember the name.
But there was one specific computer that was really built for graphics, in the mid to late 80s, that a bunch of people used. But it never really caught on, but it was known. So he may have been using one of those. I don't remember.
Right. I don't remember what was any of the painting programs. Was it Corel?
There was a
Corel.
there was an early Mac one in the mid 80s that I used, just called Paint or something like that. And it was, I think it's if you look at what were those early ones by Mike Sains? What was his name? Shatter.
Shatter, and later Crash.
And Crash. They were bitmapped programs, and what bitmap programs are. Photoshop is a bitmap program, and it keeps track of every single pixel. That's what a bitmap program is. Except you didn't anti-aliasing wasn't around yet. And what anti-aliasing is when you make a line, it makes automatically makes a fuzzy edge on the end of the line by taking whatever color you got and then making like transparent pixels of that color. That's standard. Anti-aliasing is standard now on everything on computers, but in those days it didn't exist. So which is why the shatter looks so jagged, because you had to draw pixel by pixel. If you wanted to put anti-aliasing in, you had to draw pixel by pixel anti-aliasing, which you weren't doing.
So the problem wasn't really how to make a comic with a computer, is how to print a comic made on a computer.
Yeah, because it was always going to look jagged like that, because it was like, oof. That was, and I think and that was the paint program I remember using when it was crazy. Jeff Sebesta, who's been on this show before, always calls it pixel fucking, which is when he's doing digital art and he gets so caught up in individual pixels that you can just work on a picture forever because you're dealing with individual. That's what all digital art was in the mid 80s. If you were doing digital art, you were working pixel by pixel on some stuff, because that was the only way that was the way it was done. I mean, you could put down large swaths of color, but nothing was anti-aliased. So you'd go in there pixel by pixel and try and make it look good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. I think the earliest Photoshop I ever worked on was maybe 2.
3 was mine. So.
And it was only because the college I would eventually go to had copies of Photoshop. And this is back when you had to load it on the discs. And while I was in high school, my mom went to the college I eventually would go to. So when she would have a night class, I would go with her, just so she's not up and down ferry alone at 9 o'clock. So for the 2 hours or 3 hours she was in class, I would be in the library playing with Photoshop because I didn't have that yet in high school. And I remember, it would be the small Macs, black and white, no color yet. It'd just be the tiny box, and the program, I think, were on 2 discs that you had to load in. And I remember the home page was in ink, and it was a illustration of a bunch of aliens at a bar. I believe that was it was very heavy metal.
What year was that?
This had to be 88 or 89.
That may not have even been Photoshop.
I thought it was.
Because when Marvel first went digital was 94, 95, and that was Photoshop 3.
Mm-hmm.
And the big innovation in Photoshop 3 was layers.
Okay.
So that was either Photoshop 1, because I would think that I don't know when Photoshop 1 came out, but I imagine they had to have more than 2 versions between when you did it and when I did it. So
yeah, I want to say, but it could have been 86.
Yeah.
Again, I'm just trying to remember the years, and it's
right. It was 85 when I was doing the one that was like called Paint or whatever it is in the Mac, which was pixel by pixel. That was 85, I do believe. Yeah, and that was color. There was color in those ones.
Okay, the one that I played around with was in black and white.
Yeah,
because even when I went to college, and I remember working with Illustrator, or it could just been the copy we had in the school.
Right.
Illustrator was also in black and white,
and
I worked on Illustrator, and it's like I don't know. I don't recall when I saw color. Maybe it was after I started working at Marvel. It does, that time does overlap from college to my Marvel internship, and it was, again, my thing was to be in advertising, so that's what I was learning those programs for.
Right.
Before we bastardized it with comics.
That reminds me, the first issue of Hey Kids Comics, Volume 3 is out.
Cool.
By Howard Chaykin, the schlock of the new. This is his going. What does he say in here? It's was it in here? He said it's all fictional, but it's all true, or something like that. And I think this one is called the schlock of the new. I just noticed the volume 1 trade has the balloon on there that says, "Nah, I'll wait for the trade." For the kid buying comics.
I've been trying to convince one of the publishers over here to put that thing out because I was discussing this with a friend of mine a couple of months ago. Howard Chaykin has never been published in Portugal.
Oh wow! But this has been true. We get this. I think it's called the schlock of the new because he goes back to the beginning creation of comics here, where I think we get Siegel and Schuster. It starts in 71, where we get. I think Howard Chaykin is actually one of these guys. We get the new in the early 70s. We get the new artists coming into comics, and this guy right here, what's his name? Ray Clark is Gil Kane.
Does it look like Dominic Fortune?
He looks like that, right? He's the gray-haired guy.
Yeah, and that does look like Chaykin in the 70s.
Yeah, and so he's Gil Kane, and the opening scene is I don't know which one of Gil Kane's assistant it is, but he's going into Yankee Comics, which is Marvel. And he gets an assignment by himself, and Gil Kane wouldn't let him go to the office because he says someone else had to get him into the Marvel offices and get him an introduction. Elliot. And then there's another guy here, a production artist named Elliot Saperstein, who's also an artist. That might be Herb Trimpe, because I know he was a production artist at Marvel in the early 70s. And then it flops back to 1933. Where we get some kids doing one of the first. It's like a sci-fi con, and they're doing it with some other sci-fi fans who are these like middle-aged men who show up and go, "You guys are just kids." I think that's supposed to be Siegel and Schuster, who go on to sell Powerhouse, and then they have the other kids who showed up before. Who is it? Ted Whitman is the. What's his name? Matt Baker. I think he's supposed to be a Matt Baker, but he doesn't die early like Matt Baker because he showed up later on in the comics. And then Benita Heindel, or he could just be a stand-in for all black comic artists. Just like there's Benita Heindel is kind of a stand-in for all. I don't know if she's one specific woman artist who was there from the Golden Age into the Bronze Age, or she stands for a lot of them. But like said, a lot of the guys are individual, comic artists who you can figure out who they are. But it was enjoyable. I always enjoyed this one. This was actually less confusing than some of the other ones, because this can be a confusing book with its switching timelines and huge cast of characters who are all like thinly veiled versions of certain people. Who it's like it's sometimes tough to keep track of. But this one wasn't, because it was starting all over, kind of, and it was the story of the very beginning of these, artists and their kids.
I think the fact that we try to figure out who are these stand-ins for gets in the way of the story.
It does.
We spend all the time. Oh, this guy is that. Oh, wait, it can't be that because this guy now.
Right. If they had just in some ways, I wish he had just used the actual people. I mean, I understand why he didn't. But in some ways, I wish he just used the actual people. It would be less confusing.
It sounds like it would be a lot less homework.
Yeah.
Because only if you really, truly know the history of it,
right,
you can figure out who's who. And it's not the history of like just Marvel. It's comics in general. That's a hard one.
Yeah.
To do.
You're going to 1940. And one of the interesting things he has in here is some of these artists are young, and a lot of early comics guys were Jewish. And one of the and he even says one of the reasons in here is a lot of them wanted to do comic strips, of course, but they noticed all the comic strips were done by non-Jewish people, and there were a lot of Jewish names in the comic book. So, like, you know what, we could probably actually get in there and do some comic books because obviously they're not letting us do the strips. So I found that an interesting little tidbit in here too. That's what motivated some of these artists to go into comic books, was the fact that they saw Jewish names in the comic books and didn't see any in the comic strips. But yeah,
I'm not sure if that's really true.
What was that?
I'm not sure if that's really true that they couldn't get jobs because you were Jewish.
I'm not saying they couldn't get the jobs because they were Jewish. They just looked at the names and said, we probably aren't getting any jobs there because we're Jewish. They didn't. Those comic strip jobs were hard to get for anyone. They were the cream of the crop. So I could see why they think that. They want, everybody in comics wanted a comic strip because that's where the money was. The difference between the difference between, especially in those days, between doing comic strips and doing comic books was about 10 times the pay. No joke. That's how comic strip artists were rock stars. In the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they were into the 50s, were rock stars. Comic book artists were not. They were just an everyday schlub. I'll call this guy J. Kirby. That's obvious. Let's call him Jack K. No one will know. There's a very large Jewish prejudice on all levels. Yeah. But I could see why, you would go, if you were Jewish and an artist in 1938, you'd go, comic books might be easier to crack. Looks like my internet is still down on my desktop. I don't know what that is. I even restarted. That is kind of crazy that it's still going on my laptop perfectly fine.
So let me say, you need to move to Portugal because we have the best internet in the civilized world.
Every article I read says the U.S. has the worst internet. So I can believe that. I can believe anywhere has better internet. Well, maybe not anywhere, but the rest of the civilized world, as we call it, snobbily.
Yeah, I think because we were one of the last countries in the civilized world to set up the internet, we set it up right from the beginning with all the new cool stuff. And because you were the first, everyone still kept old modems, even when everything was going to high-speed internet everywhere else.
And the U.S. is gigantic. I mean, it's just such a big area, too. And there's stuff like New York City had some of the worst internet for a long, long time because of the cable companies and monopolies and split and figuring out how to get. Think about that. How do you get, like, getting internet in the suburbs was easier to set up than getting internet in some places dense as Manhattan. How do you get internet into all those apartments? Well, you're going to have to piggyback on the cable companies or the phone companies, and they were fighting it all out for that piece of the pie.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why New York City, I don't know how their internet is now, but I know, like, up until like 2010, they had some of the worst internet in the country.
I can believe it.
Yeah. The same guy that invented Photoshop was a big cheese at Lucasfilm. Oh, interesting. The top artists illustrated magazine covers. Oh, yeah. I met a couple of those guys before they died out. I just discovered, as a matter of fact, it was in that comic historians group. Have you seen the posts of that? I don't know. I can't remember the guy's name. It's a Spanish name. He's doing New Yorker covers. Someone was posting a few of them on that comic book historians, but he does these New Yorker covers that are sort of very comic strip related. There are these really complex panels of comics. He's got 3 names that are Spanish, like Spanish names often are, because they put the maiden name in. I can't even remember. I'm gonna have to look it up. But there were some really nice New Yorker covers. I was like, wow, these ones are good. I'm gonna have to get a subscription to the New Yorker just for the covers. There's a lot of good cartoonists doing New Yorker covers.
I had a subscription for a while.
The only problem is it's a weekly magazine, so it's an expensive subscription.
It's expensive, and
you know, keep up.
I almost treat it like comics, where they pile up real quickly. Yeah. If I hadn't had time to go through it.
A weekly magazine that's a lot of reading, you know.
It's definitely, it was a fun read for a while, but again, it was one of those things where they can't pile up quickly.
Once they start piling up, it seems like a chore.
Yes,
there's the problem.
It became homework.
Right. All of a sudden you're not reading them joyfully. You're like, another one. I'm 3 behind. I have to read those other 3 before I read this one.
What I did like about having a subscription to it is that you also had access to their digital library as well.
Right.
And so that I liked. I liked that I was able to read issues that I didn't have. So you have access to the back catalog as well, if I remember correctly. Because at that time, I was really interested in maybe creating comic strips for the New Yorker, because they were one of the few magazines, or it might be the only magazine where you could send in strip ideas and they'll be willing to take a look at them.
Right. You know what's funny? In the 90s, I had endless magazine subscriptions because they were dirt cheap. They were like $8 for 12 issues. And I was like, all right, here you go. But I had 2 magazine subscriptions for the longest time, up until about like 4 or 5 years ago when I didn't have any money. One was archaeology, and the other was a magazine called The Sun, which was a literary magazine. And I just resubscribed to both of them. The Sun just like last month, and archaeology like 2 years, because they're also both fairly expensive subscriptions. I think archaeology is every 2 months, but it's still like a $25 subscription for the year. And The Sun is every month, but it's like a $40 subscription for so they're not $8 subscriptions. But one of the things that only about 10 years ago, I made this realization. And it made me enjoy the magazines better. I don't know why this never came to mind, but I was like, you know what? I don't have to read these magazines I don't have to read the articles in order. Because that's what I'd always do. You get a magazine, you read the first article, you read the second article, you read the third article, and until you're at the end. And I'm like, you know what? If I want to read the 4th article first, I can do that. And for some reason, that thought never struck me for 20 years. But once it did, I enjoyed the magazines a lot more. Because sometimes I wouldn't read them because I'm like, I don't want to read. I wasn't into reading that first section. So I had to be into reading that first section before I'd pick up the magazine. And I'm like, well, I'll read the 3rd section. I don't care. I'll read the first section.
Sometimes I got magazines for maybe 1 article, and the rest, whatever was there. But it would be something that I would be looking for. I think that's how I end up getting a few Omni magazines, was just because there was a handful of articles that I wanted to get. And then there were magazines that I was getting that I would look through it and not find really any article useful for me, but I had a subscription. So I felt that since I had the subscription, I need to read what was in there. And most of the time would be skimming. And I had quite a few art magazines that I used to have a subscription to. Watercolor magazine. and another art one. I can't even remember the name of the other art one. But there was like two that was always around. And
Art
I had
Forum I used to have, and there was one other one. Oh, I can't even remember the name of it either. But
I
Art
think
Forum
it
is
was.
still around.
Is it?
That's a fine arts magazine.
In the other one I used to have too. I think there was a magazine called Paper that was about publishing, I believe.
Right.
I had a subscription to that for a while.
Art Forum is another expensive magazine, and I just got on their email list recently. I'm thinking about resubscribing to it, but it's like $50. They keep sending like $25 ones, but it's like an expensive one. I have the same problem. I subscribed to the New Yorker for 25 years, along with the New York Review of Books, which is bi-weekly, about 10 other periodicals and newspapers. Wow. Made it difficult to then read the books since most of my time was spent reading the magazines and papers. Yeah. Archaeology is well regarded in the field. Archaeologist for 15. Okay. Yeah.
I think I found the guy. I think I found Sergio Garcia Sanchez. Was that the Spanish?
Yes, that's his name. Yes. Some nice stuff.
Yeah. So yes, I understand how we got picked up by Francoise Mouly to work there, because he worked a lot for the French market, and he worked. Okay, so Garcia Sanchez worked with Trondheim and with Leo, which is wow.
It was funny because Garcia Sanchez, I could see like the Spanish names floating around out there, because those are pretty common names, but I didn't know which ones it was. It was kind of like,
I didn't know the guy. And he doesn't appear to be very famous, but I'm looking at his page on Tebeosfera.
Some terrific New Yorker covers, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Juxtapose is better than Art Forum, also available free online. I'm going to check that one out. I've heard that one. I may have checked it out before, but I'm not sure. But I'm going to look at it.
I'm almost sure I've checked it out.
That down.
And then there was the early Photoshop magazines and stuff like that I would read for whatever comic book thing. And it used to be just one article. Something connected to comics and Photoshop. And I had gotten a lot of those, because sometimes you get free fonts, you would get brushes and stuff like that way too. But that was an expensive magazine for a while. And this is before they even had the ones that are now focused mostly on video games or video game designs and stuff like that.
The amount of video game magazines that went around the bullpen in the early 90s was crazy. Because there used to be at least half a dozen, if not a full dozen, video game magazines in like 1993. Mm-hmm. And of course, everybody in the Marvel bullpen was a video game fan. And so it was like somebody in the bullpen got that magazine. And then when they're done with it, would bring it in. It would go everybody would read it in the bullpen. So there was always like, dozens of video game magazines in the bullpen. We had lots of them. Garcia is probably one of the commonest Spanish names, especially here. Even my mother was a Garcia. Gonzalez is another one. That's right. What was his name again?
Sergio Garcia Sanchez.
Yeah. Like I knew there were common Spanish names. I just couldn't remember which ones. I was like, ooh.
So let's get some of his published work around here. All right.
Let's see. You got some of his New Yorker covers there?
No, but I'm looking at the French albums he put out.
Okay, he's done French albums too. I didn't realize that.
That's what I said. He worked with Trondheim and Leo, and those are big. All right, so
I would get the New Yorker if they had free hologram pogs like Wizard did. Yeah, my mother was also a Sanchez. That's because it was also like this in Spain, the Spanish custom to have two last names, right? Where you'd have the matriarchal and patriarchal side last names or something. I remember I'm not really sure about that, but I remember reading. That's why you see a lot of Sanchez, Garcia, and stuff like that from coming out of Spain.
Okay, so this isn't very big, but let me see if I can share screen. And okay, so this is the album that he did with Trondheim, volume 1 of 3.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not very big. I'm sorry.
Hey, Chris Gerusso's here. Good evening, Chris.
Hey guys,
Hey, Chris.
How are you
Yes.
doing this evening?
what's up?
We are here talking about an artist whose name Sergio Garcia. Let me see if I can get because I saved those New Yorker covers. If I can access my computer over there, maybe I can. I don't know if it's online at all. Let me check my file browser, see if I can transfer them over to here. Let's see.
I think.
What are you working on tonight, Chris?
I'm just kind of cleaning up the studio.
Cleaning up the studio.
I've been neglecting everything the last month, trying to get the pencils.
Here, Jared, try the series he did with Leo. It's called Dexter London. Looking good?
That's pretty cool looking. Let me see. Where's this folder? Sergio Garcia Sanchez. I can somehow access my computer. Let me pick a nice one. That one's got Batman on it. Let me see if I can airdrop. Oh, first I have to save it. Save image. Then I have to come over here and airdrop it to my laptop. Oh, it was airdropped here. Okay. Canceled? What do you mean canceled? Don't give me that.
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture is canceling Sergio Garcia, probably because he's Spanish. There we go. Let's open that. Okay, it's opened in Photoshop. Let me see if I can share my screen now. Dun, dun, dun. Present. Share screen. Share screen. Window. Oh, but hold on. I use multiple desktops, and in order to share the screen, the picture has to be in the same desktop as the one I'm using. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So let me put it into. Let me put it in. What do I usually use? Safari. There we go. Now I can share. Window. There we go. Here's one of his New Yorker covers. Hide that. Pretty cool. That's his his tribute to the museums. And he's got other ones that are even. That looks like the Grand Central Station clock, even.
Yeah, I think it's Grand Central Station, and everyone is they look like they're dressed up for Halloween, but
well, some really. Let me see if I can get this.
Yes, it has October on it, so it's the Halloween one.
Ah, yeah.
But it is Grand Central Station.
Oh, I got to go back to file browser. Here's one of his comic strip ones. Let me save this one. It's funny. I'm getting it from my desktop to my laptop via my iPad. That's the circuitous route. Failed.
It's all
Don't give me
connected.
failed. AirDrop, MacBook Air. Sending. Sent. Received it. Let's open it. In Safari. Go back here, share this. Stop that screen. Share another screen. There's another one of his.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see how that one's sort of comic strip related too, but very nice stuff.
You got another one of his graphic novels here. It's called Duplex.
Let's see.
I guess that was Central Park.
Oh, okay, that one was Central Park. Interesting. His New Yorker covers are definitely New Yorker covers compared with graphic novels, I have to say. They're definitely looking like New Yorker covers. So, Chris, I saw you had who's crumpling paper? Why are you crumpling paper?
I'm sorting through paper. Jared, you of all people should appreciate
Okay.
the receipt game.
Ah. Well, move it away from the microphone.
That can't be done.
Can't be done. Now we've got you breaking up, too. What's going on with your microphone?
I don't know.
And here's another one by Garcia. Try this one. It's called Learning and Understanding Comics.
Oh, that one's pretty cool. That one's neat.
So yeah, he's very versatile.
Yeah, Chris, you have a mini Marvels coming out in an anthology. What did I see you? I think I saw you posting something recently.
Oh yeah. It's a Marvel anthology. It's not mini Marvels.
It's not mini Marvels. It's a Marvel anthology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Published by Abrams.
Abrams.
So
is it new stuff?
Yeah, it's all new stuff from kids lit authors.
Okay. Okay. You need a new microphone. What microphone are you using?
How about now?
No, we're still getting a lot of garbling going on. See if he reconnects. A comic I got this week that was really good. I haven't seen an issue of this in a while. Love Everlasting.
Wow. It's been a while since you talked about that book.
Yeah.
Is this any better?
That is better.
That is.
I don't hear any garbling.
Okay, if I talk for more than 5 seconds, will it continue to sound okay, or am I immediately going back into robot?
No, you're
sounding?
not garbling.
So far,
You're
so good.
sounding okay.
I think the
So
signal
far-
here today is pretty weak with our Wi-Fi,
Ah.
so it might just keep happening.
All right, we'll see. But this is by Tom King is the writer and Elsa Charretier is the artist, and she's wow. She does. I've been enjoying this one. Oh my computer just came online and started playing a video that it stopped a Don the Comic Book Junkie video. It quit out in the middle of it, and all of a sudden I'm like, where's that coming from? My computer started talking. But Elsa Charretier does such a nice job with the art. I don't like this splash page very much, but the other splash pages are terrific. Let me show you some of them. Too Hip to Love. And just the storytelling is this was the best issue so far. And it was pretty interesting. For those of you who don't know, the story behind Love Everlasting is this woman is trapped in a romance comic and she's aware of it. So she keeps having all these things happen to her that happen in romance comics. And then they kind of end and she's in the next story. And a couple of times, even at the end of whatever comic, sometimes they're 8 pages, sometimes they're the whole book. Sometimes at the end, this cowboy comes and shoots her. So in this
I don't think I knew about the cowboy shooting.
Yeah, that's because that only happened a couple times, and it didn't happen in this issue, which is kind of part of the story. And this issue is all about she's a college girl living at home, and she's dating this like beatnik guy, and her mother's like, "Let me introduce you to this, to this nice guy who's a son of a friend of your father." And like the whole time, she's like, "Well, what should I do? I guess since I'm a romance comic, I should fall in love and get married to this beatnik, to this straight guy, this nice guy, and then I'll be on to the next story." So she's like, "Go ahead, propose to me, ask me to marry." He's like, "Really? Will you marry me?" She's like, "Sure." And she's like, "Is the end of the story here? Holy crap, it's not the end of the story." So then she finds herself having to go through the marriage, and she keeps expecting the story to end and her to be kicked on to the next one, and it doesn't happen. And then at her wedding, after she gets married, before the reception, she just takes off. She just grabs the car and drives, and she's like, "This story's got to end sometime." She pulls over and she sees the cowboy. And then she's like, "All right, just shoot me. End this story. Just shoot me." And the cowboy's like, "No, have a happy marriage, ma'am." And she's just like, "Crap, the story's not going to end." And then we get it to be continued. So it was just really good. It was a fun issue, kind of different than the other ones. And like I said, the art is just terrific. If you like Darwin Cook, what's his guy's name? The Batman animated guy? Bruce Timm. If you like Darwin Cook or Bruce Timm type art, she does a real good job in the same sort of general style. But I really liked this issue. Love Everlasting, issue number 6.
That story you described, it reminds me of a title of a Marvel romance comic.
Yeah.
My Love number 5 has a story called His Hair is Long and I Love Him. Which, given that it's written by Stan,
that was sort of a standard story where she's dating. That's why she said, "Well, I may as well marry the Marion kind because that's what I'm supposed to do in this story." So good issue. I don't know how many issues this is supposed to run or what. Does it say anything in the indicia? Because sometimes they just never mention that it's a limited series, but I can't imagine this goes on forever. No, it doesn't say.
It might, because she thinks it's a romance book. You think it's a romance book, but it's obviously not. It's a horror book. She's in hell. That's what it has to be.
There have been a couple of stories that played up that. There was one story that I especially liked that I guess you would call a horror, was the World War II story where she was a waitress in France in World War II. And every time somebody would die in this one platoon, they would go and celebrate him at her bar. And it went on until there was only one guy left. And it was just like, ooh, that was a tough one. So that one was more of a horror. The last time Chris was on, he was going to a school event to draw for kids. I thought they must have killed and ate him because of his Friday night silence since. So how did that go, Chris? That's right, you were reluctantly going to the library. Batman with the newest replacement, Robin, being trapped with him.
I got through it.
You got through it?
It could have gone better, but everybody was happy.
Okay. Yeah, your interference is back. You were right. Oh, well. Everybody got through it. That counts for something. That counts for something. Did you manage to get to the comic shop, Wilson?
I did not.
Mm.
My attempts yesterday and today just did not happen. It's more of I could either go to the comic shop and miss some deadlines or just work through. So I worked through.
Yep.
I'll probably sneak out over the weekend.
Chris made a little of Wilson's interference come back too, because his wasn't here most of the show. And it's
my fault.
Yeah, but I think so. I think it is your fault. If I had to blame someone, I think I'm blaming you.
Is it my fault your computer started running? I was expecting you to blame me for that.
No, it was it wasn't your fault. It was your blessing that my computer came back. So I didn't know why it stopped working. Because my desktop is hooked up to the internet through Ethernet and wireless, and it stopped. But this one was running fine, so I didn't know what would keep it down. But it came back.
I would suspect my computer is running slow because I'm doing edits and I have a bunch of files open in Illustrator.
I don't think that should affect the sound quality though. I don't know what it is because when you're on your phone last week, it was the sound quality was perfect. Remember, so it has. I'm guessing it has something to do with. Are you on wireless or are you hardwired in?
I am wireless with my computer to the internet.
Okay.
But the camera is hardwired directly to the computer.
You'll have to try wiring in one night just to see if it makes a difference. Which is just you get an Ethernet cable and hook it up to the to your router and then hook it up to your computer. That's all that is. So
I understand that in theory, and I have the equipment. I just don't know if I have it to hook up to the computer itself.
it should. There should be. depending what.
It's a Mac Mini.
Yeah,
there definitely have it. I think I see where the port would be.
Yeah, there's an Ethernet port on the back. Mm-hmm. There is. With my new Mac laptop, I had to get an Ethernet to USB-C adapter, but it was like $10. That's what I have this hooked up to the internet with. So the Ethernet goes into the adapter, and then the adapter goes into the USB-C port on this. Whoops. I accidentally all of a sudden made my screen magnify. By tapping my pad, my touch pad. Whoops.
The worst is when you do hit a button that you may have never hit before, and it does something to the screen, and it's like, oh, how do I get back? I've done that on Photoshop many a times.
You know what I had to do? If you look over here at let me see if I can lift this up. That's my Wacom pad over there. And you see that one white spot on the right? It's like a white piece of tape.
Yes.
I actually had to tape I had to tape over that touchpad on the side because that's my one I stand at. And every time I would move my right arm over to do something, so my Wacom tablet's down here. My keyboard is up here. So every time I'd reach to this side of the keyboard, I'd accidentally, with my sleeve, hit that touchpad, and it would make my screen go real big. Or move things around. It would scroll because it's like a default scrolling pad. So I'd go to reach and it would go. I finally had to tape over the thing just so I stopped accidentally touching it.
I think I had either disabled mine because they used to be there's little buttons on the top,
right?
And I was able to deactivate something that kept bugging me.
Yeah, you can program
like that. Yeah, this one I think I had to physically click because there's a little button that you can click off from doing certain things because I just like using my Wacom with just the pen. Like I
Right.
deactivated the hand stuff, the whole
Right.
pinching and moving and turning. I couldn't deal with that. It was like the pen is fine. Let it work that way.
And now I have a bunch of like I've like the StreamYard and the Tourbox, which have buttons and knobs on them. Once
Mhm.
again, sometimes I reach up to the keyboard and my sleeve turns one of the buttons or turns one of the knobs or hits one of the buttons and things just go kablooey on my screen. And I'm like, oh.
There was something that there would be a hotkey I would be pressing and miss something. And I used to flip my images on Photoshop.
Okay.
But when you hit undo, it didn't do anything. And it was, or if it wasn't Photoshop, it was Illustrator. And I would have to go in and look to where to mirror it. But it would be just a weird little thing that's like, why doesn't undo even help? And it's like would drive me crazy because, again, if I was looking to do that, I wouldn't even know how to do that.
The one thing that drives my students crazy in Photoshop, because if they're new, is that hitting the tab key makes all your tools disappear, moves them all off the screen. So they don't know that, and sometimes they hit the tab key by accident, and all their tools disappear, and they're like, "Where did all my tools go?" And I'm like, "Hold on, hit the tab key."
Yep.
And they hit it, and they come back. I'm like, that's what you did.
I know for a while I once hit, I think it was the bounding box view or click off or something. So all of a sudden these lines came out of nowhere and I really freaked out because I was in the middle of an intense job. And I press a button and now I see something that I have no idea what it is for, what it does, to the point where it's like I was not ready for it. And I almost mentally broke down right then and there. Like, why are these lines here? Why are they here? And at the time, my brother shared the studio with me, and he had to calm me down. It's like, it's like there's lines here. They can't be here. And again, it's at the 11th hour on a deadline. You don't want anything to go wrong. It has to go out that night. And again, a little thing could derail you.
But yeah, what drives every Photoshop user crazy and happens every so often is all of a sudden none of your tools work.
Yeah.
You're like, none of my tools work. What am I doing? And it's all because you have a little selection off somewhere that you accidentally made or forgot about.
Mm-hmm.
So you can only work in that little tiny selection, which is off screen somewhere. And you're like, what the? None of my tools work. I'm on this layer. Though the one thing that's on Photoshop by default that drives everyone crazy and you have to turn it off is auto select. Mm-hmm. What auto select is Photoshop tries to figure out which layer you want by where your cursor is. So it's like you go over and you pick layer 6 and you move over here to move layer 6 and all of a sudden you're moving layer 3. That's because if you look up in the top left, that it's new within the last few years, there's a little checkbox that says auto select. And that's Photoshop auto selecting the layer for you, even though you didn't want that layer. Mm-hmm. That drives everyone crazy too, because it's fairly new. Mm-hmm. Welcome to Photoshop Talk, where we talk about Photoshop. I'll show you something big and thick I got this week. Boom. Black Science Compendium.
That looks beautiful.
Wow.
43 issues of Black Science by Rick Remender and Matteo Scalera, right? Those are artists, yes. With Maurino Dionisio and Dean White on colors. I think one of them colored the first 10 issues and the other one colored it opens up pretty well too I was worried about that. And this 43 issues, it has a retail price of $60. I think I got it for $54 with my comic shop discount. And you could probably get it cheaper from Amazon.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Somebody just told us. I don't know where that came from, but that was Chris. I just didn't trust Amazon to get me this in good shape. So I was like, you know what? I'll pay a couple extra bucks and get it from my LCS. Why not? And this was a book that I read the first issue. The second issue was shorted, so I never got it and put it on my pull list and said to myself, I'll get the trade later on. You know, that was 8 years ago or whatever.
And finally, you've done it.
So I finally did it. Finally got the whole thing in a trade. And I'm told that, like, much like Rick Remender's, what was that other one that I bought of his years ago?
Fear Agent?
Fear Agent. It kind of changes concepts a few times within the story. Like Fear Agent, like started out as this one type of story, shifted over to this other type of story, and ended up with this third type of story. So I think Black Science kind of does the same thing. So that should be interesting. And the Matteo Scalera artwork looks nice. So
it's amazing that they did that as a trade, because normally they do, if they want to put out a graphic novel with 43 comics inside, it's a very expensive hardcover.
Right. Well, I know they've been doing this with Spawn, so I guess they decided to do the same sort of, where you get 50 issues of Spawn in one of these. I think they have 2 volumes of it, and they call them compendiums.
Mm-hmm. I think it's got to be 900 pages.
Yeah. 43 issues, 20 pages an issue. That's 860 right there. So I don't think there's any page numbers on it. Nope. No page numbers. But wow, that's a big chunk of comics in one place. Some spot gloss on the cover. Let's see if we can get it. See that shine in the circles? We got spot gloss. Oh. No spot gloss on the back, though. Giant Generator. Is that Rick Remender's imprint? There's a Giant Generator down there. And Image Comics up top. Rick Remender must have his own imprint, too.
Probably is.
Yeah, let's see if it says so in the indicia. Trademarks of Rick Remender and Matteo Scalera. Kareem's Rick. Looks like they don't even have it copyrighted or anything, so just must be a informal imprint they use. Unlike, Skybound is an actual business, so things are copyright Skybound.
It might be an LLC.
Remender's website says it's gengenerator.com, and it's got all his comics here.
Oh, okay. Remember, if anything goes wrong now and things are bad in your studio, at least Ike Perlmutter is canned. Yeah.
Last week was a celebration of Ike Perlmutter's firing.
We spent last week telling Ike Perlmutter stories. Of course, they were all bad Ike Perlmutter stories because there's no good ones.
No, there is a good one.
Time he was
a beautiful one that says he's no longer
immortal.
Hold on, one of you at a time. Go, Chris.
I said, never mind.
Oh, you ruined his joke, Wilson. Now he's upset. Look at him. Look what you did.
It's a blessing that I was talked over. It wasn't funny.
Was your joke funny, Wilson?
Mine was that there is one good story about him. Is the story of him getting fired.
Who was I? I can't remember who I was talking to this week. Who said that? I was talking about how there were Ike guys who were, spies for Ike. Even though, there's no good Ike Perlmutter stories, he had if not friends, at least business colleagues who were on his side. And this person, I can't remember who it was, said, if you hear someone say, "Oh yeah, he was hard to work with, but he wasn't so bad," then you know who you're dealing with. That was one of Ike's spies. It's like, good observation. Good water.
So I didn't pick up. I took out of the bookshelf, going through it, looking at the hardcovers that I have, and it's like don't have an official name other than maybe Hardcovers Revisited, and going through them, and I decided, you know what? It's been a long time since I went and re-reviewed Crisis on Infinite Earth. So this is the one with the Alex Ross cover.
Okay.
So I right before the show started, I took it off the shelf because I couldn't remember if this had a poster embedded in it or if it came with a separate poster. Because I don't think this was slip bound, but I think it had like I think it was wrapped a certain way. I was trying to remember if there was a poster to it because I do recall there being a large size version of the cover.
Okay.
Because I remember he was saying that the size of the poster of the cover when he painted it was like the size of a door.
Wow.
And it's like, and I do recall, it's like I remember there being a poster, but I couldn't remember where the poster is of it. And then these are over the pencils of George Perez. And it's like it's been a while since I've really looked through it. And now that I know more of the DC universe over the years, I want to reread it and see if I could spot those characters that I didn't know anything about when I first read it.
It's funny.
This probably my first set of DC books was the Crisis stuff that was going on.
I read Crisis on Infinite Earth as it was coming out and enjoyed it well enough. But I never reread it just because I'd never been interested enough in it to reread it. But I have a few friends who same age as me and read it as it was coming out, then read it again 20 years later. And they were all like, man, it's a tough read 20 years later. It's just not really that good.
But I wonder if it's the same thing that you mentioned before, Watchmen, that it's not to sit through it and read it all in one chunk.
Yeah, I would think. I think that's kind of specific to Watchmen and me. I think Watchmen is a better read than. I think there's just a lot in it.
Right.
That's what they're saying. There's just a lot in it, and a lot of stuff you just don't care about anymore. Kind of like there's a lot of continuity stuff in it that really is just continuity stuff. Matter of fact, was I reading? No. I was reading. It's a book on John Romita. It's not out yet. It's one that the author interviewed me a little bit for about Virginia Romita because he was trying to get an idea of who Virginia Romita was and what it was like to work with her. So he actually gave me the copy of the book, a digital copy of the book because it's not out yet. He's still working on it. And so I've been reading it, and they mention, and then they're going through John Romita's life, and I think in this book it mentioned when the new crop of writers came in the late 60s, early 70s, Roy Thomas being among them. It was Roy who wrote Crisis, right?
I believe so.
Right? Okay. And he was talking about how that was the beginning of the story about
Marv Wolfman. Sorry.
Oh, Marv Wolfman. Okay. Marv Wolfman wrote it. Same era of guys. That was these writers who were coming in were fans. So and continuity was everything to them. Like to Stan Lee, continuity was just kind of, he used continuity in that they all took place in the same, time and the same world, but he didn't care about going and revisiting his own continuity. These new writers did. So, they wrote stories about the 3 Skrulls who were turned into cows, or the Tinkerer, who was an alien invasion, and which was just throwaway stuff to Stan. The stories started to be about the stories, and that's really what Crisis on Infinite Earths is. It's a story about all the stories, which I think is why it was harder to read 20 years on.
Well, it still functions as a story because it matters to some of the characters.
Yeah.
Unlike Secret Wars, where they just go around and blow stuff up.
Which is awesome.
But I'm just thinking,
sorry, Secret Wars is my favorite story.
Yeah,
not favorite, but it's like that got me into comics, so it does no wrong to me.
Right.
I completely get it.
To me, Secret Wars was what made me stop reading Marvel comics. I was like, all right, enough of it. But like I said, people Wilson's age, Secret Wars is the greatest thing. They loved it. That's why it really matters when you start and how young you are, which always makes me think about, comic book fans now who, I've seen on YouTube over the years, who start reading comics like in their 20s. And I'm like early 20s. I'm always like, I wonder how much different that is because it's a different world when you start reading comics when you're 8 or 10.
Yeah.
Which is why so many people who started reading comics when they're 8 or 10 hate modern comics. Whatever era they were 8 or 10 in, they now hate modern comics because they want to read comics. I don't know if that happens when you start reading comics when you're 20.
I don't know. That's a good question. Because it's like
because I don't know enough people who started reading comics when they were 20. I just know all the people who hate modern. Look, they hated modern comics, and first. I knew when I was 10, I knew people who hated modern comics in 1978. So that I hate modern comics has been around as long as I've been collecting comics, which is 50 years. Modern comics have modern comics have just changed. The year of whatever modern comics they're talking about has just changed. But the concept of I hate modern comics hasn't at all.
I don't hate modern comics. I hate modern superhero comics.
Right.
But
I don't even hate them. I just have no interest in them.
Yeah, but it's a fairly recent thing. It got to a point, and it was already in my mid-30s. So it's not like I became an adult and all of a sudden I thought superheroes were silly.
Yeah, exactly.
I really do think it's the quality of the superheroes, and superheroes were dumb stories made by smart people. Now they're being made by people whose intelligence I really don't respect that much.
And also what it is too is by the time I consider myself have started being a comic collector at 9. That's when I actively started collecting comics. By the time I was 20, I've been reading Marvel and DC superhero comics for a decade or over a decade. So it's kind of like it's kind of normal to want to find other stories to read because there's only so many themes in superhero comics. I can still read a good I collect Radiant Black. That's a superhero comic. That's fine. I collect other things, but how many Batman stories have I read? 1,000? Probably not 1,000 of Batman. Spider-Man, maybe. Let's just say hundreds. I've read hundreds of Spider-Man stories. I've read hundreds of Batman stories. I was just talking to Randy Gentile this week, who was like, he says we were talking about Batman Year One. He loves that book. He's like, I can go back and read that book all the time. And I said, if I never read another Batman story in my life, I'll be perfectly happy. Because I've read hundreds of Batman stories. But why not try something else?
I felt to the point of that for outside entertainment of comics, where it's like, if I have to see Martha, and if I have to see the Waynes die once again, I'm going to become Batman.
Yeah.
I don't need to see that story again. Right. I don't need to see the slow motion pearls falling onto the ground once again. And the flip side of that is like, I don't need to see Uncle Ben die again visually in the movies. And for comics, for me, I feel like the stories are a little different, but I get it.
Yeah.
I jokingly talked about, when I first read the Hulk, Peter David was writing him. He
Mhm.
changed the color. The leader was the main villain, and the Hulk's personality changed. And almost 10 years to the date, Peter David was writing the Hulk. The leader was the villain, and he's going through a personality change. And so for me, it was like, oh, I may need to stop reading this because it gets repetitive. And then
Right.
you branch out, you start looking
Right.
for other things.
Are you saying hello or leaving us, Chris?
Just want to say, mention that that anthology book that I'm doing, the story I did for Abrams. I did a
Yeah.
6-page story of the Hulk, where the leader is the villain. Now, and I pitched them 10 stories.
Uh-huh.
They didn't all have the leader in them. Only one had the leader in them. They picked the leader.
Ah. That's childhood enchantment is hard to replicate when you're an adult. Oh yeah. My friends' kids are enchanted by manga and anime, much like I was by comics at the same age. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I loved the Bat Mansion Press. Man, I agree with Jared, and we share the same amount of time I spent enjoying superhero comics before I ventured elsewhere. Now, I also always liked the weird comics, so I'm a little different than your average fan. Even when I was buying superhero comics from Marvel, Omega the Unknown was one of my favorites. That, wasn't a favorite of a lot of people. And, I liked the weird stuff to begin with. But that's just my personality, even as a kid. But, it's okay. You know what it is? A lot of people are like they no matter when you start, like there are people who 10-year-olds who started reading Marvel comics in 2014, and those are their favorite Marvel comics.
That's what one of the things I was going to mention before is that it is strange to me when people tell me their favorite books were the books we were working on while we were at Marvel.
Yeah.
Like some people love the Spider-Man Clone Saga.
You're like, that's a thing? Huh?
Yeah. And it's like, oh, wow. Okay. Because that's when they started with comics. And it's
Right.
like, oh, yeah, I remember being there when those things were going on. But at the time, it never occurs to me that this is going to be somebody's era of comics.
Right.
It never occurred to me that, this is what their favorite thing is.
Because we really didn't like them.
We were working on, we weren't paying attention to them.
Yeah.
In that case.
No one in the office loved the Clone Saga, even the people working on it.
Mm-hmm. and again, it was just that particular time period where when I see those books, especially the books in the late 90s, early 2000s, it's I have a nostalgia for the job, the office.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I remember when that book came out. That came out around this time. We were in this office or that office, and so I see it. That's the nostalgia for me. But at the same time, it's like, wow, these are somebody's favorite books, and it's wild sometimes when you check out the prices of these things. It's like, really, that one is worth something, So it's weird living through that, and it's like. I mean, it must be that way for all comic book artists whose work wasn't really anything at that time. It's something big now.
Yeah, and like
that is wild.
Seeing like watching YouTube videos, especially of lots of people our age who love old comics. I think what they really love is when comics were all new to them. Comics really imprinted on them in their youth. So it's like when they don't want to read modern comics because that feeling, and like I said, it doesn't even matter what year they started. Whenever they started, everything was fresh and new. Everything was excited. Every month they'd pick up a new Spider-Man. It would be exciting because they never read Spider-Man before, and if they really got into it. 30 years later, you can't get that same feeling. You can't pick up an issue of Spider-Man and everything is new to you. So it's like when I hear them complain about modern comics, I'm like, you're really complaining that you're not 10 years old and everything is new and exciting. Because the comics you were reading then weren't new and exciting to a lot of people. I know, because when I was 10 and everything was new and exciting to me, there were Silver Age guys going, oh, those comics you're reading suck. You should have been reading comics when I was reading comics. Like I remember being 10 years old and going, oh my God, that guy's such an old fogey. I'm never going to be like that. I literally remember thinking to myself, I'm never going to hate superhero comics. These things are so exciting. I don't know how these people can hate superhero comics. They're so interesting and exciting.
But one of the things that kind of made me stop is not that there was a lot of repetition. I didn't really mind that, but we got to a point. The use of chronology as a tool for storytelling. Even if you were doing Galactus wants to eat the Earth again, it was part of the story, just something that Galactus did. Well, Galactus is back and he wants to eat the Earth. What's the Fantastic Four going to do now to stop it? Not a problem. Now there's no continuity. They don't care about writing continuity.
Right.
Each one is doing their own thing, and they even forget what they themselves did, let alone pay attention to what the other people are doing inside the Marvel Universe, which is why one character can die in his own comic and keep appearing as a guest in another.
See, there wasn't during my Marvel days. Marvel was a little too. The Marvel Universe was still pretty small, and they were still trying to say this story took place before that story. So I didn't really experience that. Because I think all that, the Marvel Universe getting too big to make any literal sense for continuity fans wasn't really happening when I was a kid. I know, like, Marvel Team Up was the book that made a lot of the Silver Age fans not like Marvel anymore. Because all of a sudden Spider-Man had a second book and the continuity didn't make sense anymore. And they always said, well, you know, the knock on Marvel Team Up was Spider-Man isn't a character who works in team-ups very well. And that is 100% true of Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. But by the time we got to the John Romita era of Spider-Man, that wasn't really true anymore.
Yeah, Spider-Man was a veteran. He had met all the other heroes. The fact that he starts... There's a book for him meeting heroes on a regular basis. And you can tell when there are times when he doesn't really work well with the characters, or he doesn't want to particularly work with that character that month because he's busy doing something else. I mean, besides, the continuity worked because the Marvel Team Up was something that tied everything together, and it wasn't really like they were moving the character in a direction that didn't make sense. Even when they put Spider-Man in situations that would be uncomfortable, like going to the moon to team up with Adam Warlock, Spider-Man reacted as I thought he would. I mean, whoa, I'm on the moon.
Well,
I have cosmic people around me. I got to get out of here and get back to Earth.
Sorry, I was going to say that for me, and again, Marvel Team Up falls in that 10-year period that Jared mentioned, because that was my first comic book for me to go looking for story. It's like, why did Spider-Man change the costume? The first book I picked up was Spider-Man Team Up. Those are the two books that I found. There's 2 issues of Spider-Man Team Up. So for me, it was like, okay, here's some information. You get the little yellow box that tells you to go see Secret Wars. But it was like, okay, here's where I'm learning continuity. Here's I'm learning the characters. And I enjoy Marvel Team Up because I got to see more of the rest of the Marvel Universe without really looking for it. So for me, and again, it falls into that time period. It's like, that book makes perfectly good sense. Yeah. And the one I probably enjoyed a little more later on was the where the Thing had his own book.
Marvel 2-in-1?
Marvel 2-in-1. I enjoyed that even more.
Okay.
Just because of the Thing being away from the Fantastic Four. Made him a little more interesting at that time. So when I was reading those books, it was, again, as you mentioned before, fresh and new compared to what I knew about comic books beforehand, which wasn't really much. It was any continuity I knew is whatever I absorbed from the cartoon shows over the years. That's how I kind of, so because I know I saw all the cartoon shows way before I read the comic books.
Okay.
When they were, they were in syndication, so they were all over the place. So continuity for Batman was what was in Adam West's stories. The continuity for Spider-Man was whatever was in the cartoons that I was watching, and whatever I knew of the Hulk was from the TV show. Those are the things that I kind of knew as continuity. But in the books, everything was so different. But again, fresh at the time for me.
Right.
So I could understand what you mean, because eventually, once you read everything, then you start branching off to, what does Dark Horse have? What does DC have? Because it's like, I'm already reading all this stuff. So, and there was a lot of black and white stuff coming out in the 80s.
Or
where
at least that's what we did. Not everybody branches out, though. The people who complain about modern comics sucking don't ever branch out because they want to read Marvel or DC. They want to read Batman. They want to read Spider-Man. They want to be 10 years old again reading Spider-Man. Nothing else will do. Mm-hmm. But I was going to say my favorite Marvel team-up issues, and I think I like them because it was a book I collected regularly as a kid, and usually enjoyed it. And it was usually hit or miss. But there's a run from like issue like 38 to issue like 52. I think Bill Mantlo wrote and Sal Buscema drew that like starts with a Human Torch team up where he's fighting gangsters and ends with the trial of the Wraith in a courtroom comic. And in between, he goes like back in time to the Salem witch trials, goes forward in time to Deathlock. And like Paulo said, that whole time, he's like, what am I doing? I got to get out of here. I got to go back home. But it's like, to me, that run right there just does such a good job with the team up concept, because each issue was kind of done in one, sometimes two, with a different person each issue, and it just flows together so smoothly and travels so widely that even to this day I can read that run and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. My childhood comic shop was owned by a state judge who worked there on the weekends. He ranted in the courtroom and at the shop when it came to new comics. I remember him arguing with an employee about Cerebus and other independent books. He loved his Marvel comics. I remember. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, when I show the covers to the European comics on the 4-color fossils, a lot of them like it because they've never seen anything like it. If they're not strictly superhero people, they are Dell fans or Hardy fans.
They really like the comics of their youth and before, and they're around they're in their 50s, right?
Yeah, mostly 50s and a couple of 60s.
Yeah, so they really like the old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
No issues of Black Science being shown.
No. Although one of the guys who does work at a comic book store does say that there are good comics that they can buy, and there's one that buys everything red. There's one that buys everything Red Sonja because he likes good girl art.
Okay.
But they do, even if they're not really wanting to branch out with the stuff that I show. Mm-hmm. They kind of like all the different designs that are out there in other countries. Not only with the characters that exist in other countries and the features that exist in other countries, but also how the American comics are published elsewhere. Because even if you put an American cover on and it's a US-sized comic, but it comes out in Europe, just the fact that you have a different logo, or the character's name is in a different language, and they have their local publisher's logo in there, it's already different. It already looks different. It's not the same. You recognize the cover, but man, this is that it has that enough of a new feeling. But apart from that, they like it. I mean, I showed them the stuff that spun out of Metal Hurlant or the Western comics, because the
Right.
Western comics made in Europe are much better than any Western comic made in the US ever.
Right.
And I'm not just saying that. It really is. You can do an issue by issue comparison, and you find
I don't
way that the art is
know.
made.
Do they call people owl hoots in those comics?
No,
That's kind of what I expect in a Western.
there are no Hal Hoots.
I've never seen that word used outside of Marvel Western comics.
Yeah.
Owl hoots. You owl hoots are new. Who invented it? I'm like, did Stan Lee come up with that?
I think he may have. You may have seen.
I haven't read a
You
lot of
may
like
have heard
Zane
that
Grey
once.
books or anything like that. So maybe was it a Western novel, dime store novel tradition? I don't know, but why is anyone called owl hoots?
Mhm.
Just like I always wanted to go to a carnival and yell, "Hey, Rube," to
see
see
what
people
happens.
came running to my rescue. That was always in every carnival, every Stan Lee carnival story. Someone yelled, "Hey, Rube," and there's a little editorial note, "A call for help in the carny world," or something like that.
How would he know? It's not like the carnies talk to people.
I know. I've never read anywhere else or seen anywhere else someone yell, "Hey, Rube."
There are a lot of characters in the early Marvels who want to run away and join the circus, even if they're already adults.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that when he was a kid, Stan Lee once ran away and joined the circus. We probably kicked him out after a couple of hours, but
Arnie's are scared. That was always the warning my grandmother gave my mother and her sisters. Watch out, the carnival bums are in town. And that's what that was the standard warning. Watch out, the carnival bums are in town. But yeah, if I'm ever in trouble, I may shout out "Hey, Rube" just by instinct. So hopefully some Silver Age comic fans are there and can come to my assistance.
Survival
even if you
tips
read-
is learning comics.
even if you read Tex Wheeler, and that thing started in 1948 and it's still going. I mean, it's pretty standard. The first 10 years, the first 30 years look like they're based off of Hollywood Western movies, but they are better made than American Western comics.
Mhm.
And the French and the Belgians, they were doing spaghetti westerns before spaghetti westerns were invented. The guy who taught Mobius how to draw, he was the first to do a serious Western comic. Jerry Spring started in the 1950s. He didn't want the Indians to be me Indian, how pale face. He didn't want that to happen.
A number one I pulled off the shelf this week. Jimmy Robinson's Junk Rabbit.
Junk Rabbit?
I know I've read some of his work before, but it's been years. And he's got some nice artwork. But I was a little disappointed. Let me make this bigger so I can show you, because it's got some interesting stuff in here. You get another good. There we go. It's got some nice layouts, some nice drawing. I just found there was a little too much world building exposition in this first issue that I was kind of really some interesting coloring. I think I'm gonna give it one more issue. Because the world is just so silly. I guess it's not post-apocalyptic. It's dystopian, I would say, as we've discussed before, the difference. It takes place on an Earth where garbage finally won. So And the first, I don't know how many. The first one, there's all that type there. There's all this type here, which is all about how for thousands of years humanity has wrestled with its own waste. Even back, 2,000 years ago from us, and civilizations have fallen because they weren't able to handle their own production and waste. So this takes place in a world where waste has like taken over nearly the entire earth. And there's domed cities where, the people lucky enough to live in the domed cities live. And there's outside people who just live in the waste. And Junk Rabbit is some sort of he's like a mythological creature who lives out in the waste, supposedly. But eventually in this story, there's this guy right here who is he basically does YouTube videos in the year. What year is this supposed to take place? 2198. So
YouTube
this
is
guy
still
right
running?
here is a guy from the Dome City who basically makes YouTube videos. He goes out into the the world where other people live and makes YouTube videos. And so he gets killed by what everybody says is the Junk Rabbit, hence the name of our title. And so they send out the people from the cities, of course, according to the people in the cities, if you live in the waste, you have no civil rights. They can do whatever they want to you. So they send out, this military team because he's the son of a rich guy who lives in the Dome City. The military team is now looking for the Junk Rabbit, and the people outside are like, dude, the Junk Rabbit isn't real. He's just a boogeyman story who gets stories told about him So of course, and the military people are, killing the people outside, trying to find out where the Junk Rabbit is. And you just know the story is going to end with the Junk Rabbit actually showing up. So sure enough, the last page, we get the Junk Rabbit showing up. So now maybe something interesting will happen. Because nothing, though, this whole first issue was just kind of setup. And it was pretty boring setup. But I remember reading another one of Jimmy Robinson's stories and liking it. And I'm sure this is a limited series too. I don't think it's ongoing. Probably doesn't say. Yeah, it doesn't say. So I think I'm going to order one more issue. And if I don't like the second issue, I'll drop it. And if I do like the second issue, I'll pick it up. But way too much silly world building in this first issue. They could have handled it with one panel, I say. We live in a world where waste is overtaking everything, I didn't need a whole philosophy for how, the garbage took over the world.
So you needed a classic Stanley Presents with the red bar on the top and an
Peter
illustration
Parker,
of the wasteland.
radioactive spider, yeah. That's all I need.
And the radioactive wasteland, and then the Dome City, go.
Yep, that's all I needed.
Does that at any point resemble? Does that at any point resemble Forager from the New Gods?
I don't even remember Forager from the New Gods.
The bug.
He's the leader of the bugs, but it's actually human.
Basically, we only get one panel of it. We only get this cover with the Junk Rabbit, and it looks like a guy covered in tech with he's got an undershirt on. That and this last panel are the only shots of Junk Rabbit we get. There he is. So it's just those two shots we get of Junk Rabbit, and he looks like a human being wearing junk-made armor. I mean, he's got. How good can the armor be? Because it's belly shirt armor. He's got a bare midriff. So I don't know how well that works as armor. Shoot him in the stomach. Like he's got Mark Gastineau 1980s practicing for the New York Jets in a half shirt armor. By the way, I don't know if you guys know who Mark Gastineau is. He was a linebacker who played for the Jets. And he is always the most 1980s thing to me, because he had this like he was this big New York Jets athletic linebacker, he was like the glam linebacker in the 80s, big hair, sort of full hair, and there was always, he dated Brigitte Nielsen in the 80s. He was Hollywood glamour guy. And there's nothing more 1980s to me than him in his practice uniform, which is a mesh half shirt. So his abs completely showing. It was just like, there's nothing says 1980s like Mark Gastineau and a half football jersey to me. So that's what Junk Rabbit reminded me of. I have a story about two Spoets girls. Spoets is his band, and myself got mixed up partying with carnies. I'm on the fence about drawing it because it's Hicksploitation. Come on, you're all about exploitation of all kinds. May as well do some Hicksploitation. Lowbrow is King Spoet's genre, so may as well go lowbrow. What was I just thinking? We still have no information about what Marvel is going to be structured like, because due to in order to get rid of Ike, they had to get rid of Marvel Entertainment, the business.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't
Marvel
realize
does not exist. Dan Buckley is still there. I think Dan Buckley was kind of the head, well, besides Ike. Like, Dan Buckley was the head of the comics, and he reported to both Kevin Feige and Ike, which I think meant he had to manage Ike and talk to Kevin Feige about what was really going on, I would imagine.
Yeah, because
So
I think
now that
Dan was
Ike's gone,
listed as the publisher.
yeah, Dan is reporting directly to Kevin Feige, but there's technically no Marvel Entertainment anymore, which is what Dan Buckley was the publisher of.
Right.
And they said they were going to roll Marvel Entertainment into Disney's structure, but I don't know how they're going to do that, and if they're actually going to do that.
If they were smart, it would just be in Marvel Comics once again.
Right. If they're smart, they'll just keep whatever Marvel structure's there and name it something else that Dan Buckley is the head of. I don't think there's any pressing reason to change the structure of Marvel Comics being sort of separate from Disney, because they did completely separate things.
Right.
You can't just roll Marvel into whatever Disney publishing they have now and expect them to be able to make comics. Which is, once again, while rumors of Disney just licensing all Marvel comics came up again. But I don't know if they want to do that.
Maybe not right now. I always assumed that Marvel would stop publishing comics, but that decision would be made by looking at the numbers. I wasn't really expecting them to have to nuke Ike, but because comics comics generate low income for the amount of work that it takes to produce them.
But once again, the problem is, and hopefully they're still bright enough to realize this, the comics are what generates, not the comics themselves, but the intellectual property from the comics is what generates all the other income. All the other licensing money, all the movie money comes out of the comics. So do you really want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg or not? Because as soon as if you decide to get rid of your own comic making and license all that out, it's not an intellectual property machine anymore. So do you really want to get rid of that? Because that doesn't cost you money. That makes you money. And to get rid of it means you're never going to have another Spider-Man. You're never going to have another Avengers. You're never going to have sure, you can endlessly exploit what you have, but you don't have the IP. Hopefully, they're bright enough to recognize that. I think Kevin Feige is. I think Dan Buckley is, but I don't know who above their heads is bright enough. I don't know. Like you said, it could come to some bean counter might say, "Why are we putting in all this work for this little money in Axit?" That's always a danger with a big corporation.
Comics are not expensive to make like movies and TV series, but they also don't generate money. But you need an awful amount of people working an awful amount of hours to produce one comic that month will generate revenue. And then any revenue that is generated by that comic will be indirectly, if you can turn it into a property that's used in a movie or in merchandising. And what's been making Marvel profitable is the licensing itself, even if it's licensing to Disney, because that money has to flow in that direction as well, for at least for tax purposes, because it counts as a cost that you can deduct. But if for any reason they decided that the money that they get from licensing goes to a different division, then the comics make 5-10% of what they made.
Right. We have to. All of Marvel Comics, the industry is counting on some bean counter up there to have the vision to be able to see that they're the engine that drives the car. And your bean counters aren't known for their vision. That's always the danger. That's always the danger. It's been there since Disney bought them, and it's still there. Like I said, hopefully, whoever in charge says, this is a good thing that we have Marvel Comics making comics. But as you said, someone at a moment's notice can say, our quarterly report will look better if we have licensed this stuff. Because a lot of times, like the bean counters consider like licensed stuff free money, because they don't have to hire people or make things. They just get money for other people, me hiring stuff. So it's tough. It's tough when you have to count on the vision of corporate drones to be able to see that your creative output is valuable, because creative people historically have not been able to count on that.
But like you said, maybe Kevin Feige is smarter. I think
he
understands I think he kind of understands the way that he at least can explain to the people who count the money that this is our research division, and it makes money while doing research, which is not true of most research divisions in industries.
Our research division makes us cash, and then goes on to make us cash that we
it makes cash while working. There was the thing, when you remove the guy who's in charge, but Ike didn't care about making comics either.
No.
So that danger was always there. I think it's easier for DC to stop making comics because we never know what's going on with those Time Warner mergers and being sold to Discovery Group and whatever. I'm not even sure who currently owns Time Warner.
Yeah. The hot book this week was the first appearance of Spider-Boy. Few are reading Spider-Man here, but now everyone but me wants this book at my shop. It's the new Miles Morales. So Research Division has now spawned. I have to show you. Hold on. Let me get the comic shop news, which is in the other room. Because I keep comic shop news next to my toilet, because where else would you keep it? Besides Spider-Boy, the other hot book they have in here is The Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man #5, because of the Dream Spider, a.k.a. Crystal Catawi. So there's besides Spider Boy, the Dream Spider is the other hot book people are looking at. I think that one's from like a month or two ago, so it's not this week they're going in looking for Spider Boy. But that's right. I remember I saw Jimmy Palmiotti tweeting about that Spider Boy book. But wasn't Spider Boy also one of those crossover with DC books?
I was going to mention that was part of the Amalgam universe.
Yeah, but it's not the same character. It's a new character. It just has the same name, and and at least it secures the trademark because it wasn't being used. But it was a Spider something that Marvel was in the risk of not owning.
I'm just saying this new Spider Boy means hot. Being hot means that it's only a matter of time before that Amalgam Spider Boy is hot too.
Because that was the first time the name was used.
Yeah.
So that's
somebody who's going to rediscover amalgams.
Right.
Yep. Amalgam's going to be the next big thing. It's going to make a comeback.
Yeah.
No, and can you imagine now somebody figuring out we have to talk to DC so we can make new amalgams?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
No, I don't think that one's going to happen.
But that follow, you know, every mainstream comic book character is a DC Silver Age character now. Every single comic book character has a family because they're now intellectual property. So they have to keep making different versions of the same character because it's easier to sell as intellectual property.
Because if you make your own, you're diluting the brand. But if they make it, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
We can dilute our own brand.
That's right.
What did I see in this that I wanted to get?
They're not families, they're franchises.
Right.
I might order this. There's a Neil Adams tribute magazine from back issue number 143.
Ooh.
I think its final order cutoff says on the 10th, so that's Monday. For this, I'm gonna have to email my comic shop and tell them to get me that. I haven't got back issue comic magazine in a lot. I used to get it regularly, like in the 2000s, but once again, they build up. As we were discussing magazines at the beginning, and there's a lot to read in a back issue magazine. So it's kind of like I want to spend more time reading comics. I think I was getting it a lot during that period when there, like in the late aughts, when there wasn't a lot of single issues for me to get. So I bought that and spend my comic book time reading these. But there's a lot to read in them. But I might get that one.
That's definitely a series I think back and forth whether or not to try to see if getting a like, do they make like their own type of trade paperbacks of those magazines?
They do on occasion. You check the T.O. Morrow's website, and they occasionally have sales, and you can also buy them digitally at the website too. For a little bit cheaper, and they sometimes package them all together.
They did that with the Jack Kirby collectors for a while.
Yeah, they did. I have a copy of those, and I think they recently did it with what's the Roy Thomas one?
Alter Ego.
Alter Ego. I think I just recently saw one, just like in the last month. That was like 3 issues of Alter Ego in one, I think.
Those publications I do like, but again, those things can pile up real quick.
There's just so much to read in them.
At least that's a magazine that every time you pick it up, you can find an article and go and find something interesting with it because it's all comic history.
And I still always say one of my favorite issues was the issue on Harvey Comics. It came out 20 years ago now. Just because I knew here was this whole world of comics I knew nothing about. I didn't even know who Warren Kremer was.
Right.
So it was fun to read about this, and you know they were one of the 2 biggest comic book companies in the U.S. for a decade, and I knew zero about them.
Right.
So fun. It was, and originally when I got it, I was like, because sometimes it's like you want to read about what you know about. So it's like, you know, Bronze Age Marvel. It's like, oh, great, that's right up my alley. So it was like, Harvey comics from the 60s. I was like, I don't know anything about Harvey comics from the 60s. Why do I want to read this? Well, the reason I wanted to read it was because I didn't know anything about Harvey comics from the 1960s.
No,
So
during the time I bought Alter Ego, I mean, it is stuff that mostly about stuff that came out in the 40s, 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
They spent absolutely no time talking about Marvel, which was always my favorite. But I started reading, and the more I read it, the more I got into it.
Yeah.
It's funny that I actually didn't know.
It's funny the way our minds work sometimes. It's like, because when I sit down and relax, it's like music. Once you reach a certain age, you don't have that much time to sit down and relax and listen to music, so you listen to stuff you already know. Sometimes it's like that with reading about comics. How much time do I have to sit down and read about comics? So I want to read about something I know, but sometimes it's a lot more fun to read about stuff I don't know. Kremer and Post Degas. Yeah, like I said, I don't know much about Howie Post until I bought those two, which Chris probably hasn't seen. I bought some original art. Have you ever heard of, Chris, a comic called Bunny from the late 60s?
No.
Neither had I. It was a Harvey comic from the late 60s, sort of along the lines of Archie, but I bought it because I discovered the original art on eBay and Mary Bopper's Bad Space Lady. And I just fell in love with Mary Bopper's Bad Space Lady on her vibrating broom.
I wonder why.
And then in the next, I got the page after it too, like a month later, where she's smoking cigars and blowing them in the face of the other bad guys. And this is Howie Post artwork, where they had to white out her boobs because obviously he drew them too big for the late 60s kid audience. That's funny too.
This is the thing that Frederick Wortham was talking about.
But he's Howie. Like I said, I'd never heard of. I don't think I've heard of Howie Post before those pages, or at least I did. I'd forgotten about him.
There are a bunch of in the early 50s. There are a bunch of features that were created by Howie Post. Let me bring up my personal files.
Anthro is a book. They said they mentioned of someone. He did 41 issues of Anthro. And matter of fact, when I was talking to our friend Ed Meyer, he was like, "Was Howie Post the guy who drew Anthro?" And I was like, "Yes, he was." I don't think I've ever read any of them, but that's one of the things I read about him. Wortham was right. These witches flying around on their vibrating brooms. We know what was going on. That reminds me of one of my favorite John Romita stories. I think I've told this one here, where he said the Wortham book, the section that has pictures for children who know how to look, where they had hidden penises in drawings and stuff. And John Romita said, I used to defend those guys. I was like, he's just looking for stuff and finding faces in clouds. And John said he talked to a couple of the older guys, the Golden Age guys. They're like, no, we used to do that. We were bored. We did drawings. John was like, for years I defended them. Then I found out they were really doing it.
So in 1953 and 54, Atlas had three different comics created as a response to Mad. They were called Crazy, Wild, and Riot.
Okay.
Howie Post contributed to all of them. Let's see more Howie Post. So there's a Crime Exposed story. There it is. He created Little Lizzie. Little Lizzie was what? She was the copy of what?
I think he only died in like 2012 when I was looking at
it.
Yeah. He was around for a while. But was Anthro a DC comic?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's a caveman. He's a caveman, but he kind of had some teenage-ish. He's a teenage caveman.
Ah, okay. Did he have that Archie Comics type style? That Bunny type style here?
Not totally. It wasn't totally serious, but it had some humor. I haven't ever actually read it, but I've seen it around, because they tried to bring it into the DCU, Anthro appears in Crisis.
Yep, Wortham was right. They really were hiding stuff in there.
Okay, so Little Easy was Marvel's copy of the thing that Ernie Bushmiller did, Nancy,
Oh, okay.
and Howie Post created it. Okay, so let me find more. Howie Post. Okay, he worked for a while on Nellie the Nurse.
Was that a Marvel one, Nellie?
Yeah, Nellie the Nurse was one of the big ones of their dim women comics.
Ah, okay.
It was a genre at Marvel. Stupid women.
No, yep. Oh, Anthro is a DC book. Okay, that's what he's talking about. Yep, that's his yep.
There's a couple of stories who appeared in the weird science books, but they're not rare. But yeah,
Response needed. I have to get my reward for COVID Cop, which is Dean Hatfield's Kickstarter. Oh, let's see. Wilson has some art to show us. What have we got here?
So this is Anthro in the Crisis book.
Ah, okay. Look at that. Anthro showed up in the Crisis book, riding a mastodon, or what was the other one called that was like that?
Woolly mammoth.
A woolly mammoth. There we go. I don't know the difference between the two. Like one was in North America and one was in Eurasia or something like that.
Something like that.
Here's another thing that Howie Post created at Marvel in the 50s. The Monkey and the Bear. They were funny animals.
Oh, Post did work on a few Marvel Star imprints. Yeah. That's where I first encountered him. Yeah, that probably because Saul Harris. No, what?
Sid Jacobson.
Sid Jacobson was there.
Yeah. Oh, Wally the Wizard #2.
Sid Jacobson,
Howie Post, and John D'Agostino.
Sid Jacobson was a long-time Harvey Comics editor for like 20 plus years. And Marvel hired him to do their Star Comics line in the 80s. And he was still there at Marvel when I started in the early 90s. He's still
Here's another
alive.
Howie Post.
Sid Jacobson.
The Wizard #7. But this one was written by Ben Brown.
All right. Sid Jacobson is actually still alive, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And still doing things. He did some stuff with Ernie Colon in the last 20 years where the two of them were adapting, like they did the 9/11 commission. They turned it into a cartoon. And they recently did something else even, I think. I think Sid Jacobson was writing those and Ernie Colon was drawing them. So you can find them on Amazon, if I'm correct.
So a bunch of these Harvey guys ended up working at the Star imprint.
Yeah. Well, that's what he did. So those were all the guys Sid knew. So he hired them all.
They were doing that type of storytelling. It was smart to hire them.
And Sid still had them drawing at that 2-up style.
Yes.
Yeah, but who hired Sid to work at Marvel to produce those comics?
I don't know. Tom DeFalco.
Tom DeFalco?
Oh, yeah.
If we had to bet money, I would say with Tom DeFalco.
Right, because DeFalco started at Archie. Before he went to Marvel, DeFalco started at Archie.
I wonder whose idea it was to come up with the Star line. Somebody must have known him. He was, they said Tom DeFalco. I mean, he must have been fairly well known because he was at Harvey for so long.
So they played around with the idea of Spider-Ham. They did an issue. It sold so well that the publisher told Tom, "When's the next issue?" And Tom's like, "It was a one and done, and we were just playing around." He said, "When's the next issue?" Like, it'll be ready in 4 months. So because of that Marvel Tales Spider-Ham, that started the whole line.
Oh, so what year was it? So was Tom the EIC yet, or was Shooter still the EIC?
No. Tom was probably still fairly new as an editor, because the first Spider-Ham is 83.
Yeah, so Shooter was still there because DeFalco took over after Shooter, right? There was no one in between. Because DeFalco was the EIC when I started. Good evening, Derek. Oh yeah, interesting. Cologne is a favorite. Yeah, I like Cologne. Once again, it was that Harvey Comics one back issue where I discovered I didn't realize I know Ernie Cologne from his DC work. From he did Amethyst and he did other DC stuff. That's where I knew him from. 1984 was Spider-Ham.
Started in 1984.
Okay, so
Tom
it was
the
still.
executive editor.
What was that?
Tom was an executive editor.
Okay, that's probably why he got the next editor-in-chief job. So okay,
Right.
so he might have been in charge of that group. So yeah, he probably hired Sid. But I never realized Ernie Cologne did so many Richie Rich comics. That's where he was known from. Inside Comics he was one of the big Richie Rich artists who drew a lot of Richie Rich. And I never knew before reading that book on Harvey how many Richie Rich comics there were and how many they were selling. So I of course remembered Richie Rich comics from my youth being everywhere, but they were selling millions of copies of Richie Rich in the early 70s. It was like, whoa, that's a lot. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, the latest issue of Saga came out with this exciting cover of her working at a shipping warehouse. I just
Gore
find that
Vidal,
funny.
call your lawyers.
Another good issue. Saga's always solid to me. I mean, whatever Fiona Staples did to change up her art, I don't even know what it is. They mentioned it last issue. I noticed it last issue. I'm liking her art even better. Maybe I should read the back matter, huh? Maybe that'll tell me more. They mentioned it in the back matter, because there's a lively letters page in Saga. I just usually don't read it. But nice, another good issue of Saga. It's a space saga. There's all these things going on. I can't even describe it to you. Another lying cat showed up and they actually killed it. That was shocking. Lying Cat was one of the main characters early on, but it turns out it's like a breed of cat. It's not an individual cat, but there's one individual cat, and they're big. They're like the size of, I don't know, mountain lions or something. And they can detect lying. They're called lying cats because if you lie around them, they say lying. So they're a lie detector. And here they were using one as a guard cat. So it got blasted. That was the only. But it wasn't Lying Cat from the beginning of the story. But if you don't like to see, fantasy animals getting hurt, don't read this latest issue of Saga. But it was good. Saga is a steady Freddy for me. There's none. It's always a B. But these last two issues for me, because of the art, it may be moving up to an A, which is of course a good thing. What's Saga about? It's hard to. It's this big long space saga where we start out with a space. It's about individual characters existing within this bigger space world. And in the beginning, we have this war between the wings and the horns. And much like and everybody, all the planets in this area take a side. And much like Romeo and Juliet, a woman who is one of the horns, I think it is, and a guy it's the other way around. The guy was one of the wings, and the woman was one of the horns. They fell in love and had a kid. And the whole story is narrated by the kid as an adult. So it's her looking back at her childhood. And how her mother and father have to hide from both sides. And they have to hide her from both sides. Because if somebody finds them, they're going to kill them. Because both sides hate the fact that they fell in love and had a kid. So it's their adventures. It's the adventures during her childhood. And much like the title says, it's a big, long saga. There's like little to me, I've heard people complain about it, that it's not plotted tightly enough for them, that there's not a big enough overall story for them. But for me, it's like, that's in the name. We know the name is saga. It's just going to keep going. It's going to be a bunch of individual stories, like the Vinland sagas or any other kind of saga. They're really a collection of stories that aren't necessarily related in a tight plot manner. So there's like story arcs, but the story arcs are often kind of loose and rambling, and then dramatic things happen and it changes the arc of the story. So I like it a lot, but that's the knock on. A lot of other people like it a lot too. So lion cats, so lions. There we go. They should do an origin of the space
lions are cats
series and call it Saga Genesis.
Yeah, but lions are cats. The cat is a basal form of carnivore.
Yeah.
All carnivores are descendants of a cat, of a creature that resembles a cat-like squirrel called Miacis. M-I-A-C-I-S. It existed about 50 million years ago.
Yeah. But it's tough to say but you better be happy with casual nudity, because it's funny because I've heard people like Sleepy Reader always complains sometimes. It's like, he thinks they do things in Saga to be shocking. I'm like, I don't think so. I think that's just the storytelling. And once again, there was casual nudity in this issue.
So it's just like any normal European comic.
Yeah, exactly. But to Americans, it's like, what's going on? Shocking. And I'm like, no, I don't know if it's shocking. If you've read enough Robert Crumb, it's not shocking. But like, I'm used to casual nudity in my comics. But I admit that when I was showing it off on my comics I bought this week, I flipped a couple pages and went, no, not going to show that page, just because I know other people are shocked by casual nudity. I enjoyed the new issue of Savage Dragon. Yeah, well, that's right. I got a new issue of Savage Dragon this week. Where's that one? Chris probably already read it on his, what is that? Spell check chain. This is the Nut Punch, the cover. But this one's all about Savage Dragon and Northgard, the Canadian superhero team. It takes care of a little North Force. There we go. There's the Canadian super North Force. Savage Dragon a couple of years ago moved up to Canada, and they're kind of setting up him to move to LA next, because North Force has been taking care of a lot of the superheroing going on in Canada. And Eric Larson loves cheesecake shots every now and then. And one of the things, he's fighting this woman who's in an Elektra type costume. And Dragon is even saying, and Dragon makes a point even to say, it's still called Savage Dragon. He's like, my dad was Savage Dragon. I'm not Savage Dragon. But he's pointing out that he's like, you're fighting in a loincloth. You keep flashing everybody. So she's like, why are you even fighting in there? There's even this one shot where she's flipping over. He's going, oh, Jesus, because he's looking right at her crotch as she's fighting him. And he's like, what are you even wearing that thing for? But this is an adult comic, so we have casual. Well, I wouldn't even call it casual nudity in this, because it's remarked upon nudity, because Dragon can't even believe she's fighting in this outfit. So it was a cool issue. He's trying to take care, and death happens in this issue too. Death is one of the things I like about Savage Dragon is death is usually permanent. I'm not saying always, because sometimes you get different versions of a character, a version of a character from an alternate universe. Though he's gotten rid of all the alternate universes, he crunched them all down to one. But he would make it clear that this wasn't the same character. It was an alternate unit. So it was like the other character was still dead. And every now and then he brings someone back from the dead. But usually in the Savage Dragon universe, death is permanent, which I like. Because it's one guy doing this whole universe, he can just create other characters. It's like, I think one of the reasons death isn't permanent in Marvel and DC, besides the fact that they're all intellectual property and not characters, is if the next writer wants to work with a character that some other writer killed off, he just brings them back. Being that this is one guy, he doesn't want to bring back all his old dead characters. And if he does, maybe it's an alternate universe version of him. That other character's still dead. So that's one of the things I really enjoy about Savage Dragon. So when his wife Maxine, who's just a normal human, has to run away from the fight, she's like, I got to get the kids out. She has to run away from the fight and get the kids safe. That's real. Because they could kill her, and one time they almost did. And so she's just like, let's go. Come. She's like, kids, let's get out of here. We because death is real in this universe. So she's not hanging around the fight, watching her husband fight. Or she's like, I got to book it out of here, or I could be a casualty. So that's another thing I like about Savage Dragon is that they know if they hang around the Savage Dragon fights, they could die. So let's not do that. And of course, the dragon is one of Chris's favorites. And he knows Eric Larson. Has known him for years and years.
I think that's an Eric Larson Marvel Universe poster behind him. Yeah. Or at least Spider-Man's Eric Larson. It's the whole poster Eric Larson?
It's entirely Eric.
I
think it
was I was not a fan of Eric Larson until Chris turned me into one 70 issues into Savage Dragon. So I was never a fan of Eric Larson's Spider-Man at all. It never did anything for. But I wasn't reading any Marvel comics then. But I have to say, covers have changed so much in comics, and I generally have not much interest in like Marvel or DC in general, but especially the pinup cover has just taken over, which I'm just not terribly interested in. So some YouTube video or something today was showing off some old comics, and they had some old, I think they were Eric Larson covers from his Spider-Man run, and I was like, wow, those are really nice. Because that style of cover just isn't done anymore. So even the ones I wasn't interested in back then, I now kind of like the covers more nowadays than I did even back then. Because back then they were just, another cover out of Marvel's covers that month. I didn't look at them too closely. But now that covers all have the same boring composition, looking back at those old Eric Larsons, I was like, wow, these are pretty nice covers. I really enjoy looking at these.
I enjoyed them when they came out. That was still a time where the covers were telling a story.
Yeah.
When there was something going on. I think and back then they even still had word balloons on the covers.
Yes. I enjoyed those too, if they were good. I only read the Savage Dragon issues that contain cum gargling sequences. Yes, there was some of that. Savage Dragon is an adult book, and for a while there, especially when Malcolm Dragon was first dating his now wife, whose name I cannot remember at the moment. Maxine. I thought that was it, but I thought I was wrong. There was a lot of sex going on because they were both 20 years old and having a lot of sex. So that was good stuff. Chris is a man of few words but many thumbs. Maxine, yep, there we go. It's funny, I know so few characters' names. Maxine jumped right into my head, but I still thought it was wrong. Because it's like for some reason, I can remember the names of characters from my childhood, but from most of my adulthood, I can't tell you the names. Of characters that I've read 50 issues of. Like Saga. What are the main characters' names in Saga?
Horn Woman and Wing Guy.
Yeah, Horn
And
Guy,
Is that guy?
Horned Guy, Winged Woman, their kid. I
And
don't know
some
their
guy
name.
with a TV on his head.
Guy with he's one of the robots. King Robot, Prince Robot, somebody robot.
Because
I
I
don't think
think I
guys
only
with
ever
TV on
picked
their
up the
heads,
first issue and
DJ.
never went back.
But I was like, I don't know any of the characters. I've been reading it for 63 issues and a decade. I don't know their names. How's that possible? Did you guys already discuss Chaikin's next Hey Kids? We did. I showed
that
that
was the
one
first
off.
book of the night.
Did you read that one? Because he goes back to the beginning of comics. This one covered a lot in the 30s and a lot in the 70s, and I found it less confusing than a lot of other. Maybe because he introduced a lot of the characters again, and a lot of the characters who I've been reading. This is the third series I'm reading about them, so of course I recognize them. I knew exactly who the Gil Kane character was because I remembered that from the last one. I knew exactly, and he was using his Matt Baker or stand-in for all black comic book artist characters, and his Marie Severin or stand-in for all women characters in the Golden Age character. So I recognized them right away. So it was easier to, and like, since it was a first issue, he didn't even do all the characters that are in this first issue, because he reintroduced them all in this. But terrific. And I still laughed at this. Let me go big and show it to everyone. The trade of Hey Kids comics has a kid on the front saying, "Man, nah, I'll wait for the trade instead of buying you." That cracked me up.
I didn't read that book, but what is it about? Is it just
It's the history
retelling
of
how
comics.
comics were created?
No, it's about the people in the history of comics. And a lot of it is about their real personalities and how they were mistreated or not. And a lot of them were cynical to begin with. They're that generation a lot of them were the generation of artists who weren't comic book fans. It was a job to them. And it keeps flipping around from the 40s to the 50s and it even did some stuff in the 90s where, the Gil Kane character was yelling at the Rob Liefeld character to stop ripping him off and stuff like that. Picked it up and haven't read it yet. It was a good read. I must say it was also kind of the easiest read because he reintroduced everyone. How historically accurate are the first two minis? I think I read something that said where Howard Chaykin was quoted as saying, "They're all fictional characters, but everything that happened was real." So there's stories I recognized from in there as stories. So I think he's Howard Chaykin was Gil Kane's assistant. So I think his take on Gil Kane is pretty informed. So there's fun stuff in there. I think the second was Profits and Losses. Yes. I have them as individual series. So I don't know what they're. I've got them as volume 1, 2, and 3, 6-issue series. I didn't buy them as collected editions. Though I did buy. It was funny. Since Chaykin, I was a big Chaykin fan growing up. But when I stopped reading most Marvel and DC comics, I'm a big American Flag fan. When I stopped reading most Marvel and DC comics, I stopped reading Chaykin. Because all through like the late 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s, he was mostly doing stuff for either Marvel or DC. So I just kind of fell off of reading Chaykin. But then, I don't know when it was, around 2010, when he revived Black Kiss, he started doing stuff for Image. He started doing indie stuff. So I started buying Howard Chaykin. If he had a new series coming out, I just put it on my pull list. except for somehow Hey Kids comics slipped by me. So I started reading them digitally. Because like I guess my comic shop, I didn't notice he was doing it. I didn't notice it on my emails from my comic shop where I get the final order cut off. I didn't notice it till it was, I don't know what issue it was on. So I went down and I got, I bootlegged digital versions of it to read it. And then I bought issue 6 just because that happened to be on the shelf. I was like, oh, look, you know what? But and then I went after I bought issue 6. I also found it so much easier to read as a physical comic than a digital comic, just because I could flip back to the first page easier to see the lineup of people. So then I was like, you know what? Why don't I just buy the? I looked on eBay, and the all 6 issues were there in one auction. I bought it for cover price or whatever it was, and then I made sure to put the second and third on my pull list. So I bought the second one all through my pull list, and I bought the third one. It's going to be all through my pull list too. Yeah, I have the singles too. The second volume was subtitled "Profits and Losses in Singles." Yeah, it's got a subtitle, but I just haven't paid attention to it. And I guess the first one, let's see, I think it had it in the back. Volume 1, I guess was profits and loss. It was just single. So Volume 2, profits and loss, and I guess there was nothing on Volume 1. Just hey kids comics. Nah, I'll wait for the trade. And Powerhouse is their version, is the Superman that was created in this world. Sometimes he just gives us. I find it fun too, where sometimes he just gives us versions of the covers that existed in this world, so you know what comic it is. Oh, Sean. Did I show everything in here? Saga, Savage Dragon. Oh, the one I didn't. Oh, I didn't show 2. Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer. Though I don't think this one had Death Dealer in it. It had this guy called the Norseman. I don't know if he's another Frank Frazetta.
That looks like the Odin from the what was that Kung Fury. Looks like
got a
Odin
wing
from
helmet. Frank Frazetta's okay, there's the Frank Frazetta cover. The painting it comes from. And this one was actually done in an unpainted, sort of a classic comic book style. The art is by Axel Medellin, Medellin. Colors by Luis Antonio Delgado. I think he's done colors before. But instead of doing like a painted look, they were doing sort of a standard comic book. There's a nice one. Pencil and ink look. So that was like a change of pace for Death Dealer. But it was nice. So far, I mean, this was like a solid issue of Conan. So I enjoyed it. Oh, and I put this one on my pull. Frank Frazetta's Tales of Science Fiction Anthology. I already put this one on my pull list just because I've been enjoying these Frazetta books. It's going to be a quarterly. I have been enjoying these Frazetta books from Opus Art more than I've enjoyed Frazetta stuff. So any other stuff from Frazetta. So I must say, not that there's been a lot of Frazetta comics, but they've been doing a good job with this. Anyone read Avengers 1959? Thinking of giving it a try. Is that new? I don't recognize that title.
No, it came out during the Bendis run.
Okay.
It's not bad.
Did Bendis write it?
No, no, I can't remember who wrote it, but Chaykin drew it.
Chaykin drew it. Yeah, someone may have written it for him. I don't think he was writing a lot of the stuff for Marvel and DC. So, but no, I've never read that one.
It's
like I
not
said,
bad.
I missed almost all Chaikin's stuff when he was doing Marvel and DC. I'm glad he's doing him. Walter Simonson too. I'm glad he started doing his indie book. What's the name of it? It flew right out of my head. Ragnarok. I'm glad he's doing Ragnarok, and I think he's getting ready for the next volume too. Because I like Walter's stuff, but I never read his Marvel and DC stuff much from like 90s and 2000s because that wasn't my thing. Let's see. The last book is Nightclub. Mark Miller and Juanan Ramirez. I think I can't remember if it's 5 or 6 issues. This is issue 4, $2 an issue. That's why I'm getting it. I'm hit or miss with Mark Miller stuff, and this one's middle of the road. But for $2, I'm perfectly happy with it. I don't think I would have bought it at $4 an issue, but at $2 an issue, I'm perfectly happy with it. And you can tell this is like a Netflix series because I think Netflix owns all this stuff. This is a Netflix publication, even though it's through Image. And it's about in the first issue, we get this guy, this crew of 3 who want to do YouTube stunts. They're young, they're like teenagers. They're like, we're gonna make our mark doing YouTube stunts. On the first stunt we see, the kid gets paralyzed. Stunt goes wrong, kid gets paralyzed. This detective shows up and says, "You want a second chance? I'm putting together a crew of vampires. And I'm going around to like paralyzed people. If you want to get turned into a vampire, I can do it and you'll heal up, but you'll be a vampire." And of course the kid says, sure. 17, I don't know if he's 16, 17, 18, somewhere around there. He gets turned into a vampire, but the detective doesn't turn into a mentor. He just leaves the story. So now we got this 18-year-old kid who's a vampire, and he still wants to do stunts for YouTube because he's got no mentor. He's just like, all right, I'm a vampire now. Cool. I got all these vampire powers. Let's put him to work being a YouTube guy. So then his two, there's a guy and a girl who he then is like, hey, you want to get turned into vampires and do all these cool stunts with me? They're eventually like, sure, why not? And they wear these masks. Because they can't go out into the sunlight. But they do go out into the sunlight completely covered. So they're like, hey, since we got to be completely covered, let's go out into the sunlight and be superheroes because we got superpowers. So then they try to be superheroes, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. Then they start because bullets don't hurt them, and if you kill them, they come back. But then they run into this bad thing with these drug dealing Nazis who then they run into these bad vampires and things go. Well, meanwhile, and then finally this cop who turned them into vampires shows up and goes, and this one ends with him going like, do you realize this is the last page. Do you realize how much trouble you're in? And they of course don't because they're teenagers who've been playing vampire superheroes for 4 issues. So we'll see how it is. But it's been a fun book. Like it hasn't been the greatest book, but for $2, I'd be perfectly happy to buy 6 more $2 books that were this good. My favorite Rosetta stuff is The Adventures of Snowman. I don't know that one, but it sounds like someone's doing coke. Para. I think he was paralyzed from the neck down. He was like couldn't move any limbs. But then it was funny when he turned there was a guy and a girl who were his crew who he did stunts with, and the girl was like, yeah, turn me into a vampire, that sounds cool. And the guy was like, no way, I do not want to be, that sounds crazy, I do not want to be a vampire. But then later on he was like, I don't want to be the only one who isn't a vampire. So it turned into a vampire too. So But I was like, man, no, that cop didn't even give him any. You would expect the cop to be a mentor or something, but nope, he just cut out.
There's no reason for that cop to be mad.
It's like you really think you have a right to be mad? You turned this teenage kid into a vampire and then just left?
And not stick around. Yeah, that's just that I find insane.
Mm-hmm.
But for $2, it's a great idea for a comic.
Yeah. But I mean, for $2, why am I not going to buy it? I'll buy just about any comic book for $2.
It's less than an issue of Spawn, isn't it?
Yeah. Couldn't even get an issue of Spawn for $2. You have to buy 2 issues of Spawn for 3 issues of Nightclub.
What's the page count on that?
I think it's normal comic, 20 pages. Let me see. It doesn't feel thinner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 22 pages of comic. So it's in 32 page comic here. Another 6 pages. That's 28 pages. Oh, it's self-covered, so it's 32 pages. Yeah, 22 pages of comic.
Yeah, that's neat. House ads or regular ads?
Yeah, house ads in the back. No ads in the middle. When I see ads in the middle of anything now, I'm like, what is up with this? Top 50 stores ordering our books.
Nice.
Look at that. Let's see, Newberry Midtown Comics, Lone Star, Coliseum of Comics. I've heard of that one. The Nerd Store, Utah. Cosmic Monkey Comics, Portland. I think that's the one the Sleepy Reader goes to. G Mart, Irvington, New York. I've heard it. Haven't you gone to that one, Chris? G Mart? Haven't you done a signing at that?
No.
That's. I think it's Irvington is Westchester. One of your I've seen someone in your crew, maybe Jacob or Smitty. That's why I know that name G Mart, because I think I looked up where it is. Someone I know has done signings there. The Westfield Company, Middleton, Wisconsin. Didn't that used to be a distributor? Westfield Comics? Forbidden Planet. Golden Apple Comics in Los Angeles. I know that name too.
I've heard of Golden Apple, yeah. I used to get letters from them, I think. I was on their mailing list for a while.
Wade's Comic Madness in Levittown, Pennsylvania. I've never heard of that one. The Comic Bug I've heard too. California, Manhattan Beach. Oh, and this one must be ON, Ontario. The Comic Book Shop with an E.
I've been there.
Nepean, Ontario. You've been there?
Comic shop. I've been there.
Okay. Did I say Newberry Comics, Brighton, Massachusetts? I've heard of that one.
I've heard of Newberry.
Carolina Comics in Durham, North Carolina. Another Ontario one, Captain Comics in Brantford, Ontario. Big Time Collectibles in Grand Prairie, Texas. Haven't heard of that one. Things from Another World, Milwaukee, Oregon. I've heard of that one too, maybe through Sleepy Reader. Sleepy Reader, for those who don't know, is another YouTuber who puts up videos. I've been known him for years. He, where is it? Is he in Portland? He's in Portland, I think, Oregon.
He's in Portland.
But he's got like 4 comic shops within walking distance from his house. It's like that's crazy. Nobody has 4 comic shops within walking distance from their house. In Manhattan, you don't have 4 comic shops within walking distance from your house.
I have 1 comic book shop in walking distance, and that's at least probably 2 miles away, if even.
Torpedo Comics, Las Vegas. Fourth World Comics in Smithtown, New York. That's Long Island. I think I've heard of that one. Let's see. Anything else we got? It's interesting. I haven't looked through a list of comic shops in a while. Oh, and there's also let me see. This is an ad for the Ambassadors here, which I picked up the first issue of. This is another Mark Miller one. First issue drawn by Frank Quitely. Second issue drawn by Travis Charest, right? That's how you say his name. I always say Travis Charest, but I think it's Charest.
Yep.
Third issue by Olivier Copial. I probably got
Olivier
that one
Coipel.
wrong. What was
Olivier Coipel.
Olivier Coipel. Okay, it's a COI is the Matteo Buffagini. I haven't heard of him. Then Matteo Scalera. Carl Kerschel. I don't think I've heard of him either.
Carl used to do a bunch of stuff for Marvel.
Carl Kerschel did?
Yeah, I think he's an inker.
Okay. No, that's not
Carl Bowlers.
Not
Carl Kerschel drew the last issues of the Ghost Rider.
Carl Kessel is an inker. He's a longtime inker. This is
I remember
Kerschel.
Carl Kerschel doing Ghost Rider at the end of the Danny Ketch run.
Okay, Kerschl.
Yeah, I think
Carl
he also.
Kessel. Kessel. I don't know if there's a second L. There's a longtime inker. Matteo Buffagini, Buffagini. I've never heard of him either. But yeah, they're doing. I enjoyed the first issue mostly because the Frank Quitely art was so nice. It was just beautiful. And I've burnt out on the Magic Order after I think Volume 3, so I didn't pick up Volume 4. I was just like, all right, I'm out. Volume 3 was just like too predictable for me. I was like, I've had enough, man. But I think that Magic Order is one that's going to be a TV show on Netflix. Who's drawing Magic Order? Dike Ruan, Dikeruan. Each series, I think volumes 1 and 2 were drawn by the same guy whose name I can't remember now, but is a big name in comics. I think 3 was a new guy, and I guess 4 is another new guy I've never heard of. Has anyone ever read Mark Miller's Nemesis?
Nope.
Yeah,
It's back with a new series, but I never knew it existed before. So I'm like, oh, okay. Nemesis Reloaded.
I've only ever seen images of it, but I've never actually read the comic book itself.
Yeah,
I know
I haven't even heard
when
of
it first came out, it was being advertised everywhere.
My Bad. Are you in that one, or did someone?
this is I recommend this one for people who like humor and parody comics.
Okay.
My Bad from Ahoy Comics. You see that guy in the front? That looks
Quaphead.
like, huh?
I was just
You see
pronouncing that his name again.
This guy here with the chandelier on his head.
Uh-huh.
His name is the Chandelier.
Let me go bigger. Hold on. Let's see. No.
And he's
Mark
basically
Russell, Bryce Ingram, Peter Krause.
he's basically the Batman of this universe.
Okay. When did it come out?
Let's see. This Volume 2 series, I think issue 5 is either about to hit or has already hit.
Okay, so the second volume is already.
Yeah. I have 8 comics here. I have an incomplete series.
Carl
'Cause I think-
Kestrel, notorious Hawk and Dove villain. You've got 2 series there?
Yeah. So it's a run of 5 and then another run of 5.
All right.
And I have 1 through 4 of each. Here's a pretty nice cover.
That looks very Tick-ish. So, let's see. Hold on. Let's go solo layout.
I don't know if that's a variant cover or what. But
Oh, yeah, that does look nice.
Is that Jacobs?
no.
Oh.
That is
Thank you.
Carol Lay.
Oh, okay. She goes back a ways. She's been making comics since at least the early 80s.
No, I'm sorry. That's Peter Krause.
Peter Krause. Okay, I think I know his stuff too. Is he the guy? Matter of fact, I think Carl Kessel is writing it, doing Impossible Jones.
That I would not know.
He might. I can't remember who's doing Impossible Jones, if it's Peter Krause or not. But Carl Kessel, the inker who we talked about, I think he's writing Impossible Jones, which I've been buying some of. But yeah, Carol Lay does some nice work. I like her work, but she's one of those like Trina Robbins type. I think she's after Trina Robbins, but she does those sort of comics a lot of, where she did some matter of fact, what was that one she did some stuff for Fantagraphics that I really liked. I haven't seen her stuff in a while. Quite frankly, I love Frank Quitely. I didn't realize Frank Quitely was a pen name until Bunch pointed it out. Somehow I missed that.
It was quite obvious.
It was so obvious. Quite frankly, it was very obvious, and somehow I missed it.
Is it because you only ever read it in your head but never said it out loud?
No, I think I had said it out loud by that point. I hadn't realized it long after I should have realized it.
I did not realize it when I went looking for his address to send him artwork. And
no.
There was a few times where I would read an artist's name and go, I don't know who this is. It wasn't until I said it out loud that Just in Time, the inker, was the name they had in the bullpen. Because the inker didn't want credit, a bunch of different people did it, and they put in the work just in time. But it was spelled T-Y-M,
I'm talking 4 years ago. I'm either talking to or messaging with Bunch, and he goes, and Frank Quitely in his obvious pen name. And I was like, obvious pen name? And I was like, oh, yeah, obvious pen name. And on that note, we should say goodbye for the evening. Mm-hmm. Let Paulo get to bed.
Oh, it's been almost 3 hours already.
Yeah.
It is. Time flew. It is 8:47 here in U.S. time. It's like 2:47 in Paulo time or something.
It's 1:47 in my time. It's
1:47 in Paulo time.
It's 2:47 in Earl Gray's time.
Okay.
See, once Chris jumps on, it goes real quick.
Because Earl Gray's in Germany, and time in Germany is close 1 hour.
Chris made us pass the time even quicker tonight with his endless chattering.
You can't shut me up.
And his awesome thumbs up.
Chris, yes. Chris listening to the podcast, he can talk back to. All righty. You guys have a good night out there. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.
Have a good one.